s'installe direct.
Il s'installe, en fait.
Ok, vas-y, ouais. C'est bon.
On est simple, ils sont assis.
On va commencer.
Non, mais sinon, c'est pas grave.
Ah, je vais aller.
Toi, tu sais comment il faut changer les slides? Tu m'as envoyé le lien? Ok, c'est bon. Ouais, il faut aller.
On peut y aller?
Faut juste partir, c'est bon.
So, good evening. First of all, as president of Start HEC, which is the association who organizes the panel tonight, let me thank you for your presence here. I would like also to thank our guests for taking time to be here with us. I would like to thank our partners who helped us to organize this exchange, especially the Center of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, embodied by Carole Lababi, right here, who helped us a lot with the communication. I would like also to thank the hard work of Amine, Simon, and Elodie, who take care of contacting all the experts of the panel. Without them, nothing would have been possible. Finally, I would like to thank all the members of Start HEC, especially the impressive work of communication that was done by Mathis and Anne-Lise. It was such great, and you are so numerous tonight. Start HEC tries to gather, as today, experts in various fields such as VC and tech. If you are interested with this kind of plot, please keep in mind that Start HEC receive Alexandre Mars on next Thursday, the 20th. We hope to see many of you there. Last but not least, I would like to thank our Dean, Eloïc Perrache, and the HEC administration, without whom the conference would not have been possible and authorized. I therefore leave the floor to our Dean, Mr. Eloïc Perrache, who would like to say a word to you.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for organizing this. Thank you to all the panel to be here tonight. Some of you didn't come back in the last 10 or 15 years, so it's great to see you again here, and it's great to have you over here. You know that there is an amazing history of entrepreneurship at HEC. It really accelerated in the last years. More and more students setting up their own company while they're on campus. So I started the HEC incubator in 2007, so just after your graduation. After such a cohort of great students and graduates, we said we have to do something. It was on the ground floor of one dorm building, so it was very small. And then we moved to Paris in 200 square meters in the 20th district in 2015 because we knew that we would go to Station F in 2017. And then we moved to Station F. It was kind of scary to move to Station F because we went from 20 different startups to a big, 800 square meter at Station F. So we had no idea how we would feel the place. And then very quickly there were 75 startups at Station F. It was 4 years ago, and now we have close to 300 different startups at Station F. And when you look at some indicators of performance of the startups, when you look at, we looked at between summer 21 and summer 22, the startups who went through the incubator raised 400 million euros. During the same period, when you look at HEC alumni overall, it was a little bit slightly more than 2 billion euros. over 1 year, and it's been accelerating in the last, I think, 5 years. We also thought that it would be very important to be highly identified as a place of entrepreneurship in the tech. And 3 years ago, we decided to launch a program called CDL, Creative Distraction Lab. It's totally oriented on tech. And we have at this stage 3 streams, one on climate tech, one on space, and one on deep learning and machine learning. And very soon to come, hopefully, we'll do something on quantum technologies. And it's pretty amazing what's going on in this accelerator. And I know that there are a lot of the MBA students are associated to the adventure and working with those. So at the moment we speak today, I think there are close to 100 startups created by students who are still on campus and still studying during their majors. And we've pushed that a lot. So there is really something happening around entrepreneurship, thanks to the role models that you all are. And I think it's great that you talk to the students, but it's also thanks to a great team in the Entrepreneurship Center right there. And it's also great thanks to the amazing ecosystem, because we have, of course, mentors, we have experts, we have investors, we have community builders, and without that, nothing would be possible. So Xavier Niel was on campus a month ago. He looked at the students and said, "Come on, guys, you have nothing to do, so set up your own companies." The first part of the sentence was wrong, but the second part was certainly great. You know, it's great to take some time and think about companies you could create, look at the problems that exist, and trying to solve those problems. So thank you very much for being here. Exchange and discuss about your own paths, your own mistakes, your own successes, and looking forward to hear more. Okay, thank you very much to the startup team to promote entrepreneurship on campus. Thank you.
Let me now introduce our guests. So first, Pierre Diribarne. You are an HEC Paris graduate. You are a French investor, globetrotter, entrepreneur, and co-founder of venture capital firm New Wave, a venture capital fund investing in seed stage all over Europe, funded by Xavier Niel. You invested in successful startups like Doctolib, Strappy, Be Real, and were named to Forbes 30 under 30 list in 2018. You previously worked at McKinsey, Essel Partners, and Stride VC. Thanks to those experiences, you developed a strong expertise in customer brands and marketplaces. So for Pierre Diribarne. Alice Groth. Alice, you are a graduate of HEC, also the HEC and Polytechnic Entrepreneur Master Program. You first went through BPI France, which gave you real expertise in the world of public entrepreneurship, before going to VC Corelia Capital. You set up SISTAFUND, a 100 million investment fund, whose purpose is to promote women entrepreneurship. Your latest success is that you were named in the Forbes 30 under 30 list last week. Congratulations. Alexandre Prot. Alexandre, you are a graduate of HEC Paris and INSEAD. You first worked in McKinsey before becoming an entrepreneur and investor in the Internet of Things and FinTech, CEO and co-founder of the neobank for businesses and self-employed people, Qonto, which is now valued over 4.4 billion euros. You have a talent for raising record amounts of funds, both in terms of time and money. Eventually, you're also a business angel for several new seeds. Cédric O, you're a French politician who graduated from HEC. You served as advisor to President Emmanuel Macron, and you were appointed as Secretary of State in charge of digital up to 2022. You organized the first Tech for Good summits that hosted leading tech figures at the Élysée. You are known for having launched the Next 40, which is the CAC 40 for startups. Now you're an advisor to the European Space Agency, whose main objective is to develop European sovereignty on spatial issues. Last but not least, Ning Li. Ning Li, you arrived from China at the age of 16 and learned French late in life. You are a serial luncher and member of the French Touch. Right after your graduation, you launched MyFab, an e-commerce website for event sales, and you worked between France, China, and Germany. Then you moved to London to set up Made.com in 2010, which was also a success. After guiding the company for 7 years, you have a little girl, and you are looking for cosmetic products for fragile skin. You couldn't find any, so you created Typology in 2018, a company that is now the French leader in selling cosmetics on the national markets.
So let me start off by giving a little backstory on why we initiated this panel. So when Amin and I met back in September at the beginning of the year, we immediately hit it off with our common passion for entrepreneurship. And we also remembered what Monsieur Éric Perrache told us the first day at HEC, which was learn to dare. So we took up the challenge to launch the first ever VC bootcamp at HEC. So it was 12 sessions with investors from top funds such as Kima Ventures, Partech, or BP France. And throughout the bootcamp, we realized how lucky we were to benefit from insights from industry experts. And we thought that it was a shame not to share this opportunity with the rest of the students. So that's why we started putting together this panel of entrepreneurs, VCs, and leaders of the French tech ecosystem as a final event to wrap up this adventure. And we wanted to open it not only to students of HEC, but also to anyone who's interested in the tech ecosystem.
Thanks, Elodie, for giving us this back-end story. So, hi everyone, I will be moderating the panel with Elodie tonight. Over the past decade, the French government has played an active role in supporting startup ecosystem through initiatives like La French Tech, injecting capital into startups, providing them support and as well training in order to really catalyze the innovation ecosystem in France. The results have been impressive, with France now ranking amongst the top ecosystem in terms of funding, as well as the number of startups created. A few years back, President Emmanuel Macron goals of creating 25 unicorns in France by 2025 was surpassed last year, 3 years ahead of schedule. The new target is now to achieve 100 unicorns by 2030, including 25 unicorns in the climate tech space. The question that arises now is how will we get there? And now I would like to start by diving into the world of French tech and explore its mission and impact. So Cédric, could you please explain the French tech mission and how it has contributed to the ecosystem?
Well, obviously, and first, thank you for having us today at HEC. It was a real pleasure to come back on the campus. I was discussing with Ning and Alexandre because we happen to be from the same promotion, and I think we did not get back here for the past 10 years. It has a little bit been changing over the years. Well, I think it's important to say why this was, fostering the French tech ecosystem was so important for us. And I think we have to take a few steps back in order to understand why we gave so much importance to that, and actually why the president himself got involved into the whole process. I think if you look at the way the world is unfolding these days, I think the major triggers that is defining the way the world is evolving is the competition between China and the US. From a European point of view, we can consider that the Russian issue is important, that what the problem of immigration that we can have might be important, that the social tension that we have in France is important. when you look from a worldwide, on a global point of view, and you discuss with with South Koreans, when you discuss with Africans, when you discuss with Americans, the main issue is competition between China and the US. Regardless of what you think about that competition, this is what is shaping the world economy, and part of the competition is a technological competition. And so there is, to some extent, a huge race between the US and China on technology. And the question for Europe is Europe part of that, or is Europe maybe a junior partner or not even a partner into that? And I think it's going to shape the future of Europe, of our children, and I would say the century to come. And if you look at how the European economy has been working or had been working over the past century, not century, but the past decades, there are a few figures that were pretty striking to us. First, if you take the companies of the CAC 40, so the 40 biggest, the Fortune 50, Fortune 100, the equivalent of the biggest company in France, in average, the age of CAC 40 companies is more than 120 years old. So that means that, in average, the biggest French companies had been created more than 120 years before today. That tells you everything about the genius of entrepreneurs, researchers, and people that took risk at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. That tells you everything about what we've been missing in the meantime. Because if you compare that to Chinese or American company, I think Chinese or American company is less than 30 or 40 years old. Which tells you, which is actually pretty normal, that in a well-functioning economy, you have newcomers that take over incumbent and things like that. And referring to the competition I was mentioning, if you take another figure, the 10 biggest company or listed company over the world, even today you have 8 tech companies, 6 companies that did not exist 25 years ago, and 0 European. And so all the question is, how do we get back into innovation? And if you want to get back into innovation, you have to be able to make new players emerge, because this is new players that usually innovate. And so that was basically the basis of what we thought when we were elected in 2017, is that the European economy has been defined in the 70s by a catching up economy. We had to catch up. But now we are an innovation economy. And so if we are an innovation economy, we have to be able to foster the emergence of new players. Otherwise, we're going to be kicked out of history in terms of economy. We are already lagging behind. Not to be too long, it's true that I would say the derivative of the curve is much better than it used to be. I mean, if you take in Europe the overall amount of money that is invested within European startup, 10 years ago it was 1 in Europe, 15 in the US. Today it's 1 in Europe, 3 or 4 in the US. So we are still lagging behind, but there are a lot of things that can make us hope.
Thank you, Cédric. So you said that we're still lagging behind, but I think it's important to note that we've known a great performance of the French tech ecosystem in 2022 compared to the other ecosystems. So to give a number, France was the only major European ecosystem to see a funding increase last year, while the UK and Germany saw drops of 20%, and US fundraising even fell more than 30%. So my questions for Alice. What do you think are the reasons the French tech ecosystem outperformed its peers last year?
I would say it's kind of funny to answer this question while we are hitting a global crisis at the moment that concerns everyone. I would say I think I would answer more globally in the past 10 years. I think 10 years ago the French tech ecosystem was obviously not at the same stage as it is now, but behind, for example, the UK, the US, etc. I think in the past 10 years, the French tech ecosystem really got to grow thanks to, of course, action like the one Cédric led, and a lot of different things from the global actors. What is interesting there, I think, is how the building of the ecosystem actually happen. I think the first actors, of course, after the entrepreneurs, were the fund that were there to really fund that growth globally. And in the past, even 2 or 3 years, we continued to see a lot of new fund created. New Wave was one of them. SISTAFUND was a more recent one at different stage. But I think that the fact that we had such new amounts of funding globally were also a great answer to all those new companies that we had. For example, during my year at HEC Entrepreneur, it was a bit before this crisis, a bit after the COVID crisis, but before the financial crisis that we have now. And we had access to a lot of different VCs, a lot of different theses that we had super interesting interaction with, etc. And I think you were talking about, I think it was Cédric talking about new actors to foster innovation. I think you really need to make that happen also with funding. That's also something that we, maybe to zoom a little, I can come back on that later, but on mixity on the ecosystem, there was a lot of things that were done to help women have access to funding, but not actual funding was dedicated to that kind of teams, for example. But on a more global scale, I think that was one of the key points. I would also say in the last years that we saw a lot of different positions that were created. For example, even within funds, within VC funds, a lot of, for example, portfolio support. That was so maybe that's a question for the entrepreneur of this panel, and how much that was maybe key, maybe at the beginning of the equity story, etc. Maybe at a later stage it's a different play, but I think at early stage that means a lot. To be able to be connected to the right person, be able to have access to the right expert to scale on one particular vertical, etc. So I would say that also counts on having the next players and having the growth of those next players. This portfolio support thing is also something that is key even outside of the portfolio support teams. I would say that's also a role, particularly at early stage of VCs in general. And I was talking about the new VC fund that were popping up everywhere in the past years. That's also a way to differentiate, because there is more and more competition within different venture capitalists. So all those traction, I think, are one of the maybe explanation of the growth.
Thank you, Alice. So Ning and Pia, you've both worked in the UK. So maybe can you tell us if you've seen similar trends? How was the French ecosystem versus the UK one? And do you think it's better to work here in Paris, or here it's Jouy-en-Josas, but is it better to work in Paris or in London?
Jouy-en-Josas is not Paris.
Yeah, Jouy-en-Josas is not Paris, right? But Ning, you've created a startup both in Jouy-en-Josas, I believe, with MyFab in Paris. So maybe Jouy-en-Josas, Paris, and London, which is better?
No, I think. Sorry, can you hear me? Yes. I think there's one thing in France that's a huge funding source that nobody talks about, and I think could be very beneficiary for you guys too, is the chômage. Because I think as an entrepreneur, when you start out as your first project, your biggest source of fear, and you can only see, infinite, opportunities to fail, is how you pay yourself. And I think that's quite unique because I didn't see the system in London, and you don't have that in China, and you certainly don't have that in the States. Is that when you have, I think, maybe once you have worked a few years and you decide to quit your job and start your new company, you have 2 years pretty much of guarantee money from the state so you can start your company. And I think that's a huge source of funding. And for me, when I started my first company, that was MyFab here, I was not eligible to it because I didn't work before, but my partner, who was also Associée, 8 years more senior to me, he was able to benefit that, and he had a family, kids. And I think if he didn't have chômage, he would have never left to really, start this company. And I think, but that is compensated at the time by lack of funding, because pretty much apart from that, we had to do 200 pitches to raise one term sheet, very low hit rate. Whereas when I moved to London, I think the hit rate for my second company was a little better, maybe one term sheet for 20 meetings, still pretty poor, but ratio of 10 times better. And that was kind of old story now because that was 2010. I think once I came back from London for the new company, I can see the ecosystem radically change. You have Station F now. You're even allowed to start a company, I should say, at the campus. I don't know whether that was allowed at our time to start a new company when you're still a student. So I think things really changed quite a bit. And I don't have the most up-to-date comparison. I think, Pierre, you can maybe add to that.
That's a very good question. So I've been struggling on that question for years. I've been between Paris and London with one apartment in Paris and one in London, and telling people in London I live in London and Paris that I live in Paris. That being said, I think, so objectively when you look at the numbers in the ecosystem, the UK is still ahead of France, but there is a trend where the UK is I believe, in the decline, and Paris is going up. When I started in venture in 2015, for me there was no even a question where I could be based in Paris or work for a French fund. The best international funds were in London. The funding ecosystem was in London, and working in Paris for me would be the equivalent of being in La Provence. When we decided to set up New Wave, I think the trend had changed. So Brexit affected London. Moving back from London to Paris switched, I think, in the past few years from being a bit of a loser move, like people who cannot afford to live in London anymore, who moved to Paris because life is cheaper, to a positive move. And we've seen more and more, I think, people move from London to Paris for positive reasons. And in the tech ecosystem, I think it's been really the case. So we spoke about the French tech. We spoke thinking about the ecosystem here. Paris, you spoke about the numbers, and I've seen that also at my level as a VC investor. A lot of the American funds moved to Europe and are spending a lot of time in Paris. Sequoia, for example, which is one of the best funds in the world, in 2022, 60% of their investments in Europe have been Paris. And in the end, now I'm actually officially gave back my flat in London, and I live in Paris.
Okay, so it's Paris for Pia, and Ning, we're still waiting for an answer. Was it better to start your company in Jouy-en-Josas, Paris, or London?
No, I think it's so hard to tell, but I do think that I can only speak of what I know. So my new company is in the cosmetic space. What I have always been puzzled for this, cosmetic industry. So tech is probably a stretch, but it's a startup. But in France, you have created some of the best companies in the world in the cosmetic industry. L'Oréal, Chanel, LVMH, L'Occitane is probably the latest innovation that was like, billion-dollar category, but that's 30 years old. And after L'Occitane, you pretty much a blank space. Of course, you have new brands. I'm not saying, I'm not discrediting them, but all of the new exciting innovations in the cosmetic, skincare space came from either, mostly from the other side of the Atlantic, or even the UK, Charlotte Tilbury or, Glossier. So I've always wondered, why can we not create something in this wonderful country because Made in France is a hugely beneficiary label, and you have all the talents here. You know, when we started Typology, and we had this amazing ability to talk to all the people getting bored at L'Oréal, because all of them at some point get bored and want to join a project that has some meaning, and choices are very limited. So I think we have all the key ingredients, you know, for at least this industry I know. It probably has some parallels for other industries too. So I think you just need some catalysts or some examples for success.
I think some people here might have signed for an internship at L'Oréal, so I hope you're not going to regret that choice. But maybe at Typology.
Oh yeah, we're hiring.
You're looking for interns.
Can I just jump into the conversation? I think it's important to get back to what is innovation. And I think innovation is a combination between three things: talent, capital, and market. And I think it's not much more than this. If you look at the French situation, like historically speaking, okay, the market can be better because we can like deepen the single market in Europe, but well, the market size is pretty good. Talent, we have a lot of talent, but we had a problem with capital. And the problem with capital was making a lot of talent to get abroad, either to London or, I don't know, for AI researchers, for instance, they were going to work with American companies in the Silicon Valley. And if you look at the major innovation hub in the world, like, for instance, China or Silicon Valley, it's like the biggest concentration of capital, of talent, and it's a big market. And why did we have that problem of capital? Because when you were doing business in France, in terms of taxation of capital rate, in terms of labor market rules, in terms of the environment around doing business, it was completely out of international standards. And what changed actually between 10 years ago and now, it's when it comes to, for instance, taxation on earnings, when you are an entrepreneur or when you're a VC, it's in the international standards. And the bet that we had at the government was to say, okay, if we get back into international standards in terms of doing business, then there's going to be money coming here. And if there's money coming here, then the entrepreneur that yesterday had to go to the US, or the researchers that wanted to create a company that had to go to the US, then they would find some money here. And I said that's what happened. I must say, much better than and much faster than what we expected. And so we got back into international standards. So international investor came here. They funded company like Qonto and things like that. So a company like Qonto could grow here, could raise capital, and could hire people coming out of HEC or out of École Polytechnique that in the past would have gone to the US or elsewhere in order to find an exciting life or an exciting entrepreneurship life. And I think that's actually what's really worked well in France. I think that's also why I'm a little bit pessimistic about London, because actually they decided to shot a bullet in the head with the Brexit, and they're going to have a major issue with that for market size plus on talent immigration, because it's also a question of are you able to attract a lot of foreign talent? But well, we will see.
Yeah, I think moving on the point that just mentioned, I think each stage is really well funded in France. I think the growth and later stage is not really well funded today. And maybe I would like to ask you one question for you, Alexandre, and maybe one for Pia. As we can see in this graph, we have really great players in terms of seed, Series A, Series B in France generally. But if you look really in terms of non-European like funds that can finance this really growth later stage, we can see that we have big players such as KKR, SoftBank, even Sequoia that you just mentioned. So maybe, Alexandre, could you give us really insight about your journey and how you walk through this? And after PI, if you can give us some insight about how can we really structure this ecosystem in terms of growth and helping companies to be market leaders in Europe. So maybe, Alexandre, if you would like to start.
Hi everyone, indeed super happy to be back on campus after a couple of years. And by the way, we talked about diversity. I was quite happy. I was counting when also the others were answering, like kind of the female-male ratio in the room, and it felt like almost 50-50. So I'm not sure if you're all like willing to work in tech or to found a startup or whatever, but it felt like a good ratio. So I was quite happy to see that. But to get back to the question, I think there are two. Two very different questions, which are like, is it easy or can we get funded in France or with a company based in France with late stage types of rounds? And the answer is definitely yes. Of course, the current environment is a bit more complicated, but overall the answer is very much yes. Then the second question is, where is that money coming from, or where are these funds coming from? And the question is, and the answer is, they're all non-French, or almost all, and they're almost all non-European. As you can see here, KKR, Tencent, DST, which by the way are 3 Qonto investors, and the others are not. But bottom line, they're definitely. Eurazeo is a Qonto investor, so there are a couple of French names, but in general, for Series D, Series E, and after, so rounds of, let's say, more than 100 million or so, it's usually led by a non-French, and again, even a non-European, very often a non-European VC. So when you look at the two questions, the good news is companies like Qonto, we raised more than 600 million in the last couple of years. So, and we raised that money, by the way, without having to move, meaning that we didn't, also the period was pretty good, but my point is we didn't have to travel for weeks and to do, fundraising trips to the US or even London or whatever. We stayed in Paris, if I may say. Also, we had to stay sometimes because of COVID, but you see my point, like a lot of investors came to see us because Paris and France is definitely on the roadmap for most of these international big investors. So the good news is you can raise large amounts of money when you're based in France. The sad news, in a way, is that I won't give the exact number, but a big chunk of the Qonto capital is owned by non-French and even non-European investors. So if we make Qonto a huge success, which I hope it will, it started well, but there are still quite a few steps ahead. The financial benefit of that will be a lot for non-French and again non-European investors, but very much like the CAC 40, the Paris Stock Exchange Index we discussed about earlier, is owned, I think 55 or 60% is owned by non-European investors. I think exactly the same is happening with the next 40 index. So the good news is that we have lots of great companies in France, lots of great scale-ups that have raised very nice amounts of money and that have means to hire great talent. Cédric mentioned Cédric mentioned the French tech visa, and to get international talent. We have more than 1,000 employees at Qonto. We have 60 nationalities. A lot of these employees or team members are obviously non-French, but also non-European. So we have lots of Americans, Brazilians, Canadians, Asians, Africans coming to Europe and to France for or with or because of Qonto or thanks to Qonto. So that's great to see that, and it's indeed super easy. Much easier, let's say, than 10 years ago to do that. So that's great. But yeah, these names like the KKR, Temasek, and so on are indeed not European names. And we hope that, or I hope that in the next couple of years, we'll have also larger funds, let's say, based in Europe, but it cannot be done overnight. So I think you cannot really skip steps too fast. So it's already good news that we have successful, or overall, let's say, successful, scale-ups coming out of France and Europe, and probably 3, 5, 10 years from now, we should get a couple of more European, let's say, names on this slide in the right-hand corner, or top right-hand corner.
Okay, thanks a lot. Maybe Pia, if you can elaborate.
No, I agree with Alexandre. I think to have great growth funds in France, you have to also reflect the maturity of the market. Even if companies have raised more money and more growth funds, there still hasn't been that many great and big exits, and so it's like a virtuous circle that needs to be created. Today, you're a founder, you want to raise a growth fund. The best growth funds in the world are not French. So the French are going to have to up their game if they want to finance companies like Qonto or Typology. I think great exits will also help, and I think that's still the question mark for the French ecosystem.
So, Alexandre, your previous startup, Smokyo, was bought by a large company. Just before, you talked about, the fact that Qonto raised, a lot of funds, and you've also talked about the CAC 40. So, my question is, do you see Qonto being bought out by, let's say, a large bank anytime soon, or entering the CAC 40 and competing with, let's say, BNP Paribas?
Well, anytime soon, no. So there's clearly no news coming soon. No, I think we, the story. So you mentioned Smokyo or Smokyo that we co-founded with my co-founder Steve exactly 10 years ago, actually, in April 2013. So we built that first company for 3 years, and then it was acquired. And right after, we sat down and said, okay, what should we do now? And we wanted to build another company together. And we had faced the frustration of dealing with traditional banks when building that first company together. And so we said, okay, let's make it easy to run a small business or a small and medium business when it comes to banking and accounting and financial, let's say, stuff. And so we launched Qonto in 2016. I mean, we founded the company in 2016, launched in 2017, really to solve the pain we had faced ourselves. And it was really kind of built by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs. And so 6-7 years in, we are now serving 350,000 SMEs in France, Italy, Spain, and Germany. So we have these 4 markets, the 4 largest European markets, or at least European Union markets, let's say. And so we raised a very nice Series D, not 2 years, 1.5 years ago. And the goal is definitely to keep on growing the company very much for the next couple of years. Then, quite logically, at some point, we might think of what will be the kind of the midterm event that will also enable our early investors to sell part of their shares, because this is the way it works in the VC industry. Our first investors invested in 2016, and long story short, in 2026, so after 10 years, they expect to be able to sell part of their shares. So in the next 3 years, we need to figure out what is the best way to do that with them or for them. So of course, IPOing is one option. So we're getting ready for this option. But there are also some other options. Selling the company is definitely one option. But it's too soon to tell. And I think for the next 2-3 years, we're still very much focused on growing. We acquired about 9 months ago our German competitor, or equivalent, that is called Penta. So right now we're integrating that company and that team, and we're very busy on these operational stuff. But we might have some, selling the company is one option, but it's definitely not the favorite option right now, and it definitely won't happen anytime soon. So we're kind of focusing on keeping on growing the business, making our clients very happy, growing our number of clients. And our belief is, the better job we do at serving our clients, the more options we'll have down the line to, provide some liquidity to our investors.
Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing this insight. Cédric, I've been stalking you on Twitter last month actually. We found this tweet. And I would like maybe to talk about it, if you agree, of course. Is ChatGPT more important than the retirement reform? I think if you can give us more detail on why, and it will be nice.
I think it's 10 times more important. So it's funny because it's an issue I've been spending a lot of time these past weeks, 2 months. And I think it might be the most important technological revolution that we've been experiencing. And actually, I'm not saying that. I'm not the only one saying that, so it's not me saying that. But for instance, last week I was with Eric Schmidt. And numérique was pretty straightforward on the fact that it might be the most important technological revolution since the internet. And so if you believe that the outcome will be that it will be automatization and robotization in 10 years for white collars, and that we already had a few issues to manage robotization and automation of blue collars over a century, then yes, in terms of economy, in terms of geostrategic issue, in terms of societal issue, in terms of what is going to change even on the information society, it's huge. It's huge, and I do believe that this should be the main issue for almost everybody just right now. And actually, the question of the pension research reform is obviously, I mean, personal point of view is that obviously we have to do that reform. Obviously, it's like pretty logical that with the extension of the life duration, then you have to work more and things like that. So, but the question is not this one. I mean, if we think for the coming decades, well, like, yes, I mean, LLMs as a whole, not only ChatGPT, but LLM as a whole, is a huge question. And the question for the French government, but also for the question for the French government should be, first, how do we get to have a French team into the competition, which is not trivial. But if you look, for instance, at the Llama model, which is the model that was released by Facebook, there was 14 people signing the model. There was 11 French. So there are French people that know how to master those models. And the second question should be, there are two questions. How do we deal with the consequences, or how do we prepare to the consequences and to the transition? And how do we deal with the collateral damage that might also be huge? And I think there are a lot of questions for companies also. But yes, I think this is major.
Yeah, I think maybe one follow-up question that I could ask you is how can we make it interactive and inclusive for everyone? Because this is, as you said, a revolution, a transition, and maybe my question, and Elodie can continue on it, but how can we embark people in this and make it as a common good? Or will it be the next way of enriching capitalism, maybe?
So it's a very good question. And I think it's one of the main challenge for the Western societies over the years to come. So I spoke about the race on technology. So we have to keep up with that race and be able to be as good. And I think we have to aim at being as good as the Americans and the Chinese into the technological race. And there's no reason why we would be less good than they are. But at the same time, we feel that there's a huge tension within the society on the pace of technological change. And I think it's a major issue of worrying. It should be, I mean, it's actually already a problem, and it should be a major issue of worrying, because what we've seen, and it's not only the case in France, what we've seen in the US with Trump election, what we've seen in the UK with Brexit and things like that, that there is a backlash from the middle class, and especially the lower middle class, that is basically saying to us, telling us, okay, I get what you say, but what's in it for me? And the truth, from a purely mathematical point of view, is that there's not much for them on the short term. And I think it's going to be even more difficult with ChatGPT, so it could elaborate a lot on that. But bottom line, the question is, if we want to at least be able to raise the question, then we should be in the discussion. Today, we're not in the discussion. Today, we're not even at the table of the people that are discussing that. So first, be at the table, and second, discuss the consequences. But first is to be at the table.
Okay, super nice.
So in previous interviews, Cédric, you've talked about the fact that you've talked about the cliché that the French entrepreneur is usually a white male wearing Stan Smith. So my question is, Alice, with initiatives such as SISTAFUND or the French Tech Tremplin that you initiated, Cédric, what concrete changes have you seen in that regards?
First of all, I'm not wearing Stan Smith, so I think I'm good.
Maybe it's Nike.
Veja.
No, being basic here, but I think we have a lot of progress in the past years on the topic of diversity. Super glad to hear your comment, Alexandre, on diversity in the room, because it's super important to count that kind of thing every time you're in the room. So thanks for that. In the past years, we had seen a lot of different initiatives. SISTA was among them. There was also some others. Certain were also brought on a global stage. For example, France Digital is also looking at that kind of topic. We have also global initiative and global interests from global players, from the government, etc. What we did, maybe I can talk more about what I know and what we do at SISTA and SISTAFUND to answer that question. SISTA was launched in 2018, was actually a NGO, still is an NGO. I actually joined as a volunteer a few years ago. Before that, I was at another NGO called Start Her. That was launched by Roxane Varza, that you all know as a Station F director. The two NGO merged in 2020 or 2019, sorry. And we started working globally with a permanent team and a volunteer team. So I was part of the volunteer team on the side of my studies and my different positions. And what the NGO is focused on is so 3 pillars. But before those 3 pillars, the NGO launched a pledge that was signed by a lot of the VCs from the French tech ecosystem. That was to invest in 25% of female-led and gender-balanced teams by 2025. So that was a few years ago. 2025 was, super down the road. Now it's in 2 years. And we have seen progress, but I'm not sure that every fund will be able to reach 25% in 2 years. So we to try to track that, on a really data-driven way. We launched the first pillar of the SISTA NGO, which is data. So I was talking about the fact that you should count women in a room. That really is, for us, the first thing you need to do in order to make women count. You have to count them. So to really be driven on that, we started working with BCG to every year publish a barometer that will this year it will be in June, but usually it's in March. And this barometer is really helpful to really have that data-driven approach and have that scientific way of looking at it, because you always have people telling you that you should not be for quotas in every situation, but what you can measure when you have that kind of barometer is that quota also are efficient in many situations. For example, on leadership teams, on CAC 40 companies, etc. That is, I know, a huge topic of debate, but happy to maybe enter more details on that. But to really sum up that first pillar of the NGO, the data and the barometer are something that we need to go further and to maybe illustrate a bit more. Last year, we released the 2021 barometer, and the 2021 barometer showed that during the year 2021, we had 88% of funding that went to all male teams. Most of what was left was directly driven to gender balance teams, and I think it was like 3% that went to like 100% female-led companies. So there was a huge gap, and the funny thing is we have that kind of number where, for example, I think it was a few days ago, I've seen a very interesting stat. I think it was the S&P 500 index that showed that on the 500 companies of the index in the US, there was like 41 led by a female CEO, which is, let's be honest, not a lot. But that 41 companies outperformed the other companies that were in the index, and that is absolutely impressive to look at, because I think it was close to 400% in returns, where the other companies were more around, I think, 250. So those the companies led by women are less funded, are less common, particularly at a super late stage like those companies, and still they outperform. So I think there is that's really what like the opportunity that we have seen at SISTAFUND. I was talking about the fact that women had a lot of ways to be helped in general. They can have a lot of different advice. They can have a lot of pitch advice, expert advice on legal and everything, and that's helpful, of course. But where we like the genesis of SISTAFUND is also the fact that they can't raise the same capital as all male teams. They outperform. So the opportunity for an investor here is to target that kind of deal flow and to have another analysis of the deal flow, to select those outperforming companies and make them part of our portfolio to have better returns. So I think what we need, maybe not to focus too much on the problem from the past years, but to focus on what's going on onwards. I think we really need to focus on that opportunity, and a lot of different VCs have also seen that opportunity, and we have a lot of discussion on that on VC's network, where we share deal flow because we know how much that's important. And on the first, so we are a newly created fund, so we started in 2022, and we did our first closing of the fund, because funds still also have to fundraise just as startups. We did the first closing, so we started investing in last October, and we did 5 investments. And on those investments, I think we have a lot to do to help them outperform.
Yeah, and one of those investments were the exploration company.
Yeah,
yeah. And so before we move on to the Q&A parts, maybe let me ask you a round of rapid-fire questions. So the principle is that I'm going to ask each of you a question, and I expect a very brief answer in maybe a sentence or two. So let's start with Alexandre. What was your biggest business challenge?
You don't have any.
No, but I mean there are lots of. So I would maybe answer a bit differently, but I think one really key success factor for us at Qonto was the founding team and having a co-founder that I trust, and that we've worked already together on the first company that was, let's say, a small success. That was a very good foundation for Qonto, and trusting each other, having worked in very different good but also very tough moments, and being a good couple, let's say, in professional life was very very important. And I mean, the team is the key, and by definition the founding team is also like the key. So I think that was very much something that helped a lot. And so we could, with that team, and then of course the team we assembled, we could, go through lots of challenges and a couple of crises maybe.
Yeah, maybe Pia, what is an investment that you have passed on, but now you wish have made? And this is recorded.
Qonto. In 2016.
Ning, who is the greatest tech investor of all time?
Of all time?
Of all time.
Can I pass? Of all time, it's really hard because I was only born, much older than you. But
well, in your generation.
Okay. I think. Shit. I will have a very controversial answer to this question, actually, because you can measure best investors by the performance, and then you can say, some of the best funds, by performance. But I think one of that has really changed, some of the topic of tonight here is. So I said French chômage earlier, which was the best investor. I think I still is top one. Second one is BPI France, I think. So it's a very, from the outside looks very like dull, boring public institution. But damn, the amount of money that's pumped into the ecosystem really changed the French face. So I think from the impact, at least for the French, perspective, I think that really make a big change, and I think it's partly to the government, like Cédric is part of that. I think it really make a big change.
Sorry, I know it was only one sentence, but I'd just like to add. I think, and it was mentioned earlier that Xavier Niel was on campus months ago. I think not only because of the money he poured into the ecosystem, but also very much the visibility. Station F, École 42, like lots of initiatives have really helped the ecosystem. And I think there's been, like, in the last 10 years, lots of initiatives that helped. So we talked a lot about the government stuff, which are very important, and Cédric was very much part of that and described really well what it was. But some also private initiatives like Xavier Niel, also some more, let's say, controversial initiatives like the family. And there's been a lot written on online about the founding team and some things that happened and so on. But still, like, a lot of things happened in the last 10 years in France and in Paris, very much, but overall in France, that I think helped a lot, give lots of people, including myself, to be honest, the energy and the willingness to start and to test something. And I think that's really what's most important.
Yeah, well,
I think it's fair to say that there would not be any French tech. I mean, the French tech would not be that one without Xavier.
Yeah, seconded, they invested in SISTAFUND, so.
I would say that Amin almost wanted to invite Oussama Amar also on this panel, and I thought,
yeah, but
maybe.
It's a democracy, so we should, yeah. Okay, it's fine. Yeah, maybe Alice, who is the entrepreneur you admire the most? Or entrepreneur, yeah.
In the French tech?
Yeah, in the French tech.
That's tough questions.
This concept is designed to give a quick...
Okay.
Quick, spontaneous answers.
Because...
Céline Lazorte.
Okay, nice. Resilience killer.
She's a serial entrepreneur. She did a great company with Litchi and was one of the pioneer in fintech, I think, alongside Alexandre. And now she's really working for the greater good with resilience. And yeah, I think I really admire her.
maybe, yeah.
And last question, Cédric. Among the next 40 startups, which one do you see entering the CAC 40 first?
And yeah,
And beware that right next to you.
So I cannot answer Qonto because it's
we want to invest, make money.
And one last question.
Yeah.
So if I don't answer
Wait,
Qonto, I
it
would say
wasn't Qonto
Miracle.
then?
I think Miracle is one of the highest
Well,
potential.
too bad for you, Alexandre.
No, I would have said Qonto, but it's too easy.
It's too obvious.
You want something more controversial than saying the name of the company of the guy that is sitting just next to you. Or maybe Typology, could also have said that. But I think if we name someone that's not here, I would say Miracle.
Okay, amazing. And one last question for all of you. What is the most valuable thing that you learned here at HEC?
One thing.
Meeting my wife.
Oh.
Sorry, it's sad.
I met my co-founder here from my year. So.
It's quite hard to go after that one and that one. I would say to really go out of my shell and reach out to people. Like if I have one advice ever, it's to really reach out to people. That's always going to be useful for you guys.
And maybe Cédric and Pia.
I think it's everything I did outside of the campus. So, and it's césure and exchanges with other universities. So really the opportunity to have a real life experiences.
I could say the same thing than Alexandre, but I would say I think I would say trust to some extent.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Maybe we can move on to the Q&A part right now.
Yes, thanks. So if you want to ask any questions now, you can just scan the QR code, and if you want, you can just like the most interesting question, and then I will ask them to our guest. So maybe the first one to begin, Ning Li, you could start. What are like the most common mistakes that people launching their startup are doing at the beginning, and how to avoid them?
Most common, I don't know, but I certainly know a few that I've made. So I think in the very beginning when I started my first companies, I think I have this imposter syndrome, right? You create something, you think it's gonna work, and suddenly it started working. And I've always felt that I needed to hire people from like big companies because they bring in professional experience, they bring credentials, you know. So I remember at May.com, I was, when the scale was really getting big, we wanted to hire a marketing director, and marketing was never really my thing. I scored a D at HEC. So I felt really unsure about myself. So we went into the best companies like P&G, we paid like 80K this headhunter to hire, the best marketer in, P&G. And then this guy came in after like a huge interview process, and it was just a disaster. So my key learning is I'm not, and I think we made another few hires from big companies that really didn't work out after I realized that, a lot of people look brilliant on CV from big companies, but they are really not the key, right fit culture-wise for your startup, and can really be harmful. So learning is hiring is the key, and don't hire necessarily on CV, and don't really pay too much attention on, the kind of big logos or whatever they have done before, and really stay true to what you really need at the stage, and a little bit 1 or 2 years ahead of your stage, but not too much, I think.
Okay.
Just
yes,
to add on that, I think I would even go one step further and maybe I don't know if it's a warning or else, but maybe talk about the founding team. Sometimes in many cases we see problems in startups at early stage because of the founding team and because of disagreements between the founders. I think, and it's not from my personal experience, but more what I've witnessed since I've been working in VC at early stage, and also during my year at HEC Entrepreneur, where everyone in the promotion were starting to try to found a co-founder, and sometimes going quite fast on that topic. If you have any red flags, you really need to listen to them, because sometimes you still a bit joining what Ning just said on you're focusing on a skill that you need, or some different stuff out of past CV, of past resume of the person you're trying to associate with. So I think it's sometimes something that is overlooked, where it's like the most important thing in the startup, because the market can be a bit different down the road. The product can also change. There is a lot of things that are going to change, but not the founding team most of the time. And when it does change, it's most of the time super painful, and also like globally, it's always easier. Like you always hear about how founding team is a bit like a couple. I would say that the parallel is super interesting, because like a couple, for example, if you're buying an apartment, you're projecting into the future and everything. Of course you're writing your first status as a startup. It's always easier to be on the same page and find something that you all agree on when you're not in a good mood, but always in a good place, I would say. Where if you are a few years down the road and some things are kind of going down on for different reasons, it's always painful. And I've seen some terrible I would say accidents on that path. So I think to complete what Ning just said, it's even further than who you recruit is also who you associate with.
Okay, and maybe Alexandre, if you want to add on the acquisition of talent, as entrepreneurs, what qualities do you look for when finding international talent in order to expand your company all across the world?
I mean, it doesn't really depend whether they're like international, European, non-European, French or not, and so on. It's always at least at Qonto, we're looking for people that are, energetic. Definitely, energy is a big criteria. That are honest and have integrity. It might be obvious, but it's not always the case. Of course, the ability to work, within a team, even if you have some, strong, personalities and so on, is definitely important when you have such a large team. And then of course depends on on the topic, on the seniority and so on. But I would say energy is probably the number one, at least in my opinion, criteria. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. One question about relationships between tech ecosystem. Two questions, in fact. The first one is the following. Seems like President Macron had a good time in China, one of the biggest digital economies in the world. How do you see this relation develop in the near future? And the other question is about the Israel tech ecosystem. So maybe you could talk about relationship between tech ecosystems.
Maybe Cédric.
Well, I begin with the Israeli one. I think it's some kind of a model. It's incredible what they have been doing in such a small country, not, I mean, in terms of number of people. And if you look at the numbers, so I don't have the 2022 numbers in mind, but I think until 2020 at least, or 2021, the Israeli startups were still raising more money than the French ones, which is pretty incredible. And I think it's the highest in terms of first money that is invested within the startups per capita, and the gain per capita coming out of the startup. It's a first in the world. It might be the first in the world. So I think it's very interesting, and it's very interesting also to see how they were able to develop the ecosystem and a very sovereign ecosystem out of foreign money. Because you don't teach to Israelis what sovereignty is, but you have. But I think 90% of the fund that are invested into Israeli startups is not Israeli money. I think it's very impressive. They have some issues these days lately because of some political issues, but I think what they have been able to achieve is very impressive. With China, it's a tricky question for many reasons that you can understand. Well, I think it's a geopolitical question mainly. I think for France, it's difficult for France to align with the US on that point. But at the same time, you have to say that, well, the US are our ally, and we cannot say the same with the Chinese ecosystem, with China. But in the past, for instance, on climate change, China has been a more reliable partner than the US. So it's a tricky question. And obviously, you have a lot of geopolitical issues. If you comment on the Chinese ecosystem, it's funny because we discussed that with Ning in the cab coming here. I think China has an issue because it's very powerful. There are a lot of money that is invested in the ecosystem. But I think if you want to achieve innovation, it's difficult to do that in a non-democratic country. Why do I say that? It's because to get the most of innovation, you must have freedom. And you must think that when the entrepreneur must be able to think that at the end of the day, he can make as much money as it wants, and there won't be any X factors that will come here and seize the company. And I think that was the secret recipe for China. It was like it has the political choice it has made, but it was a free market that was incredible for entrepreneurs. Chinese government has been making some decision lately in 2021 and 2021 that I think is a major problem for entrepreneurship in China. So that's my personal point of view. And I think it's going to be difficult for... They can invest money in AI, they can invest money in research, they can have the biggest number of AI researchers all over the world. If they don't have any entrepreneurs that build companies who think that they will make giants, then it's going to be a problem. And so I think this is a tension that the Chinese government, but it's their choice, and I don't have to comment on that, has to make. I think, can you achieve an innovation economy without the freedom that is usually attached to that? It's very interesting for LLM model, for instance, because China is really strong on AI. I mean, they're 10 times stronger than France, for instance. But can you achieve an LLM that is on a par with OpenAI or GPT-4, maybe GPT-5 tomorrow, if you don't open the access to your people and if you don't have hundreds of millions of feedback on your model? I'm not sure. So I think, and I think the jury is not out. So there are a lot of questions. So this is the way I see the Chinese challenges, but I'm not a specialist of China from here. And I think, and my opinion has been evolving over the time. So I was really thinking they were really on the way to catch up with the US 5 years ago. I'm not as sure as I used to be now.
Maybe Ning Li, if you want to add on it.
Well, it's a tricky question, as Alex said, right? I think, for China, I'm much more, I'm a torn because I live here as a Chinese. I was born in China. I grew up partly also here. I think if you don't talk, then the chance of war is bigger. And I hate to see it now, lifetime a war between any countries and China. I think just such a scary thought. And what is worrying me today is that there's a lot of decoupling happening on a political level, but also in the investment level. I think a lot of investors are fleeting this potential future risk, because they say, if one day there's some conflict, then we don't want our capital being kept somewhere where we can pull out of. And I think that's a shame. And so to my dismay, it's going not in the right direction because we are talking less and less. And this trip of Macron made is a good one, but it's probably not enough to stop the trend. I certainly hope there's more collaboration, more discussion, at least taking part between Europe and China in a way to create room for common space more than differences.
Okay. Few more questions. One for our investors today, Alice and Pia. How do you differentiate yourself in big rounds where there are a lot of different VCs who want the same deal?
I can start. But, what we have worked on at SISTAFUND is especially that kind of positioning, because we are a new fund. We have a new kind of thesis, but we use it at our advantage because we are not a generalist fund. And we won't bring the same thing. I think what we want to bring to the table is first our network of LP entrepreneur. Where I was mentioning earlier that a fund also have investors. Part of our investors are corporates, institutional, etc. But we also have a pool of LP entrepreneurs. Those LP entrepreneurs are, for example, specialist experts because they've, for example, launched a scale-up in France. You were mentioning Miracle earlier. We have one of the founder of Miracle in our LP pool. So we work a lot with them and our portfolio companies to really have access to their expertise. And that's something that is super valuable at early stage, because when you have access as an early stage founder to that kind of profiles that have that kind of expertise on their sectors, their market, it's really interesting. And we also have a lot of visibility thanks to the NGO that was live before the fund. So for example, a few weeks ago, we did a campaign for March 8th, where we did a campaign called Take My Seat, where we asked a lot of leaders in France to give up their LinkedIn profile for different women. Among those women were our portfolio companies' CEOs, for example. We had President Emmanuel Macron join the campaign also at the last minute, so that campaign had a lot of visibility and therefore was super useful for portfolio companies. So we try to really go over the classic things that and try to be a bit thinking outside the box on what we can bring to the table, but maybe more globally and not on the portfolio support that we provide. I think because of our positioning, we have kind of a unique access to early stage rounds, because we can put a stamp about diversity, about mixity, and that shows that the other VC in the round and that the entrepreneur are caring about that topic. And nowadays, and that's a good thing, we have a lot of people that are thinking about that topic as a new priority. So I think that's also important for us. And to be fully transparent, I think that also part of our strategy is the fact that we invest mostly as follower or sometimes co-lead. But with this strategy of not leading most rounds, we also open the door to other co-investors and other funds that want to lead, and therefore complete the round. And that is a strategy that has, at least for the 5 first investment, that has been working, because we don't need to compete. For example, I don't think that for now we would be able to compete against an Axel, a Sequoia, or even a New Wave, those top funds that are in place for longer than us, and that have a great reputation and are bringing a lot to the table. But by completing those rounds, we can, without fighting for that seat, have a really added value to that.
Okay, Sophia, what's the pitch for a New Wave?
So we invest at seed, so the whole game for us is actually to be the first investor, and the first investor also to spot the founder in which we're going to invest, and actually to never have to compete because we're before anyone else. So that's really the game, and that comes from a lot also, from our network. A lot of our investors are founders who themselves refer other founders to them, and we try to talk to them before anyone else. So for example, Be Real, our intern was actually using the app because he was 20, which is the target age group for that app. And so we heard about him. On top of that, he had studied at 42 and had done the incubator of Xavier. So that helped us because we're also very close to Xavier. And we spoke to him. He hadn't spoken to any other funds, and he decided to work with us. And then it's really a people business. So I think it's a lot about the references. So in order to decide to invest in a company, the key part of the due diligence at seed is to reference the founders. And I think we encourage them to do the same. And so we encourage them to talk to our founders and also our LPs, who are often founders, to make the decision. So if we have to sell, I think that's how we do it.
Okay, thanks. One really interesting question for HEC student. 2 of you worked for McKinsey before joining VC or starting your startup. Do you advise us to do the same?
No. I'm trying to be efficient and short on the answers now.
Okay, Memdi, if you want to add.
If you want to be an entrepreneur, no. I think if you want to be a VC, yes. I think going into VC straight out of school is a mistake.
Why?
Because you don't get trained at VC. It's a job where good investors are not necessarily good managers. They're not going to train you. If you want to be trained somewhere, you have to go somewhere else.
Okay, so for example, like joining a startup, what?
Yeah, joining a startup, going into consulting, investment banking. But I think just outside of university, you don't have enough experience to go straight into venture.
Okay. Alice, do you agree with that?
No. I mean, I think it's interesting. I went working to VC just right after my master's, but I worked a lot during my studies, so that nuanced a bit what I'm saying about working out of school and etc. I think you have a lot of different VCs. That also is something that you need to consider if you want to work in VC. You have a lot of different theses, you have a lot of different stage. It's not the same thing if you work at early stage or at Series B plus, etc. During my studies, I worked a lot in different startups, in marketplaces, in insurtech, and I even launched my own company. And that was super interesting, and I've learned a lot. And I started to have a really big interest in VC right after BPI France, because I worked at the fund of fund part of BPI France. So I was talking a bit earlier about institutional, etc. So BPI France, of course, invested in a lot of different startups, but also in a lot of different funds. So at the time, I really had a global view on the funds ecosystem in France and abroad. So that was super interesting. And before that, I thought I knew what fundraising rounds and VC was about. And I realized at the time that I didn't know a thing about it. And there I worked particularly on accelerating other VC funds. And that was super useful, because when you join a newly created VC, it's super useful to have the best practices and the common mistakes that they have made or other VCs have made in the past. And then, like to answer more globally, I think what I've loved about the proposition of Tatiana Jama, who launched SISTAFUND in 2022, is the fact that everything was to be created. Even the branding, even like the thesis, we worked a lot on that. And for me, it was more of a semi-entrepreneurial journey, some months after HEC Entrepreneur. And it was really the perfect fit between having an entrepreneurial journey that was a really good fit for me, but I also wanted to do VC, so that was really the best of both worlds. And I think, of course, it's super interesting if you go through McKinsey and you work a lot and you work on a lot of different things. But I think you can also learn a lot from scratch and by putting a lot of hours in something that you're building. And in my opinion, that will bring you a lot further, even in your next experience, if it's in VC, if it's in startups, etc. I think that is, in my opinion and in my personal view, much more interesting for the next steps.
Thank you so much, Alice, for sharing your experience. I think Alexandre has a company to bring to CAC 40, so maybe we'll wrap up now.
Sorry, I need to leave. I'm really sorry about that, but just wanted to maybe one last word. I think it's never too early to launch a business. I think if I could go back in time, I would probably try to start something sooner. So that's number one. And number two, comment for you is that I think probably in the room, like everyone is interested at least by entrepreneurship and tech, but I think it's not for everyone. So I think there's been like in the last couple of years also like a bit of an idea that, entrepreneurship is cool, is fun, it's super hard. It's super risky as well. And so I think lots of people are very wise not to go into tech or startups and are, very happy at McKinsey, and which is a great, I had a couple of years that were really good there. So really great place. There are lots of, very large companies. I think Ning mentioned, L'Oreal a couple of minutes ago, which is an amazing company. I've never worked there and so on, but it's definitely a great company. So it's, tech and entrepreneurship is not for everyone, but if you are interested or tempted or excited by it, I think that it's never too early to get into there.
Thank you, Alexandre, for this last answer. So I would like to thank all our guests for this tremendous conference. I would also like to thank Elodie and Amin, who have done a great job. And I would like to say that on Thursday, the 20th, StarTech receives Alexandre Mars for another conference. And if you like, there is a cocktail waiting for us right here in the S building.
Ça va, boss? Ouais, j'arrive, je dois juste prendre en interview et je reviens de côté.